A love for humanity is, in a word, philanthropy. It is complex. Study world faiths and you'll find it is a universal covenant. Philanthropy is more than the idea of the rich sharing wealth. We'll talk about the concept of giving and what it means to society and to you and your family on Newsmakers. What is philanthropy is a question and the title of a new documentary. It takes a deeper look at philanthropy, its history, its role in the lives of believers and non-believers, social impacts in health and education. It asks the question why people give. The main researcher behind the question why we give is Salvatore Alaimo. He's professor of nonprofit management at Grand Valley State University. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Patrick.
Well, you tackled an easy one.
Yeah. Yeah.
What is philanthropy?
Yeah.
How many years behind that?
5.
5 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
And at what point did you say, hey, this is something that is a concept and a question that needs to be researched?
That's about the fall of '08. I had just gotten just earned my PhD studying philanthropy at Indiana University, and having studied the topic extensively, and having explained to family and friends the field that I work in, and realizing a lot of people don't understand it, yet we're all engaged in it. That irony just propelled me to want to try to correct that or try to enhance our awareness. So I picked the visual medium as the way to go.
Where did you start?
It started hatching my outline in my living room in my home in Decatur, Georgia, when I was still living there, and enlisted 2 local cameramen from the Fox affiliate there to review the outline, and we brainstormed and just carried it forward from there.
The documentary itself, it's well over an hour, right? I mean, there's a lot that went into this.
Yeah, yeah, and that took 40 hours of footage to boil that down to 86 minutes.
So for you, you have some big names in this as well. I mean, you went out and you've captured some names in American culture that people who they would know. Who did you reach out to first? I mean, one is somebody on MASH who we all know.
Yeah, Mike Farrell, Emmy-nominated actor of MASH, known as the character BJ on the show. And I picked him. I had just actually read his book, Just Call Me Mike. And it struck me at how this actor was engaged in social activism and the causes he was engaged in. So contacted the publisher and we set up the interview.
And in that exchange, what did you learn about philanthropy through his eyes?
Well, and in fact, we just made the final cut of the film. One of the things he says is, because I kept saying social activism, he says, you know, we as citizens are all technically, by default, social activists, but we make choices as to whether we engage in trying to make social change or not. And if we decide not to act, we're giving up the innate power that we all have as citizens in this democracy. And I thought that was very telling.
It seems most people can boil philanthropy down into 2 basic themes, and if I'm wrong, correct me. It seems as though there is always a faith or religious piece of giving, and that it's the wealthy who share wealth. It seems as though that's what most people think of when they think of philanthropy.
Yeah, I agree with those 2. I would add a 3rd one, that it's just the giving of money. And I think it's that narrow view. That narrow view was also another influence in driving me to make this film, to try to broaden our horizons beyond those things. Yes, it's all those things, but it's a lot more.
What is it about faith, though, as a true driver behind giving and being philanthropic?
Well, I think it's a basic tenet in all the major religions. It may be worded slightly different, it may be phrased slightly different, but if you look at the Muslim faith with zakat, if you look at tzedakah in the Jewish faith, and you look at some of the teachings of Jesus in the Bible, across the board, giving is an innate tenet of all the major religions.
Is there a resistance to giving that you find with people?
I think the resistance comes in people being skeptical about possibly the causes of the organizations they're considering giving to. And I cover this in the film too. There is a downside to the world of philanthropy, quite frankly, and you know, there have been some scandals, there have been some bad uses of money, illegal and unethical behavior. So I think when that happens and the media grabs onto that, that can drive some of the skepticism, and I can understand why.
But how much of it too is just being a volunteer and giving of time?
Oh, a lot of it. The giving of time actually in some cases can be more valuable than the giving of dollars. You know, when an attorney is providing pro bono legal service, that's at a high rate. Or even if someone's volunteering their time and giving their expertise or their skills, there's a high value to that. And sometimes, depending on the situation, that can be more valuable than if that person did nothing but write a check or hand over the dollars.
Can you measure the amount of giving, whether it's financial or giving of time? I mean, is there a way to measure that?
There are various methods out there that people try to use to measure this. I know independent sector uses the United States Bureau of Labor Statistics to try to measure the average value per hour of volunteer time, and I think it's $22 and change right now. But then there's the exact value. What would it take to hire a full-time person to do whatever this function or task is the volunteer is doing? There's various methods, but what's hard to measure, to really answer your question, is the ripple effects that giving has that go beyond just the immediate task of handing over the dollars or volunteering their time. That's harder to measure.
What did you learn in the end, and what do you hope other people learn while you were going through this process?
Well, as far as my learning, learning how to make a film, first and foremost. This is my first time, and after 5 years and a lot of effort and time and money, of my own money too, I learned that this is not for the meek or the weak. This is a brave endeavor, and I have a big respect for filmmakers. What I learned too, even having earned my PhD studying philanthropy, I still learned a lot from the various people in the film, because I knew there was going to be a breadth and depth to the variety of reasons why people give and how they're engaged. But the subjects in the film brought me even beyond my wildest dreams or imaginations as to how broad this concept really is.
And you start out with the real basics, the history of philanthropy,
yes.
right?
Yes.
And there is the beginning of the worldview, but then in American history, this country has its own philanthropic history.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, when the first colonists came over to this country with famine and disease and harsh weather, they either learned how to give to each other and be cooperative, or else they perished. So you see that in the earliest days of the colonists, but also the early formation of the nonprofit sector, as we call it, is based on England's charitable laws from the 1600s. So when the folks came over from Europe, they brought these traditions and these laws, and that's really what has undergirded the nonprofit sector as it stands today.
And I've had a chance to watch the documentary. So Ben Franklin kind of bridging government, capitalism, and being philanthropic in society together.
Way ahead of his time. I mean, even today now we're lauding the praises of social entrepreneurs and public-private partnerships, and you know, Ben Franklin understood this concept back in the 1700s. He started this organization called the Junto, and basically was the early form of what we call a Rotary today, a bunch of businessmen gathering to say, look, we operate our businesses in this community, we live in this community, here are the problems, what can we as businessmen do to try to solve our community's problems? And he did it from a secular perspective. He was one of the first to look at it from a secular perspective and not bring in faith or religion into the equation, and try to get a scientific or business-like approach to solving those problems.
Sounds like Grand Rapids. We have a lot of businessmen in this community
Absolutely.
who come together, have their own Shinto, is that how it's pronounced?
Junto.
Junto.
Junto, yeah.
Well, and a lot of the different quality of life constructions that we've had in this city as well. Women play a huge role in the undertaking in this country.
Oh, tremendous. When you look at some of the important figures, not only just in the history of philanthropy, the history of the United States, people like Susan B. Anthony, you know, and women's rights, the right to vote. People like Jane Addams, the first female Nobel Peace Prize winner, and arguably the founder of what we now call today social work, with her Hull House in Chicago. Women continue to have an important role in philanthropy.
There's individual giving, there are foundations as well. Talk about individual giving, and then we'll roll a clip with Alex Smith, who's quarterback for the Kansas City Chiefs. So let's just talk about individual giving, and that's quite an undertaking for a lot of people. I mean, you can give of your time, you can give of money to different charities that you like, but there are others who really take the leap.
Oh, absolutely. You know, the lower income and middle income folks in the United States actually give a higher percentage of their income philanthropically in terms of dollars than in the upper class. And another misconception that people have is that the bulk of philanthropic dollars come from the wealthy or the big philanthropists or the corporations or the foundations. 72 to 73% of all philanthropic dollar giving in the United States comes from individuals like you and I. So individual giving is alive and well in the United States, and it goes beyond giving of dollars. In my film, you see someone donating blood. You see moms in Indianapolis that just are getting past the grief, or trying to get past the grief of losing their newborn child, to donate their mother's milk for other moms who have newborn babies. So individual giving can take many forms.
Did you come to a conclusion why folks in the lower part of the income scale give more?
What I gravitate to is maybe because maybe the empathy is a little bit stronger. I'm theorizing here. I don't have any research to substantiate that, so I don't want to make that bold claim, but I think if they're walking in those shoes, I think they can understand more so what those folks are dealing with.
And then foundations play a huge role in this country. This is Alex Smith and it's a foster care foundation. What's
yeah, Alex Smith, quarterback of the Kansas City Chiefs, started his own foundation, and he provides full scholarships to San Diego area high school grads coming out of the foster care system. So imagine being 18 years old, you've graduated high school, you don't have any parents, you don't have a job, and you'd like to go to college, but you got to put food on the table.
And here's your interview with Alex Smith and what is philanthropy.
Alex Smith is the quarterback for the Kansas City Chiefs. However, Alex's contributions to society move far beyond football.
So I grew up in San Diego my whole life, and then I went off to school to the University of Utah and came back to California, got drafted by the San Francisco 49ers. And once I started my foundation, I knew what I wanted to get into with foster youth, specifically aging out, you know, that transition into adulthood. And that's when I came in touch with the Guardian Scholar Program, and I knew that was something I wanted to do. And
me and my little sister were taken away from my mom when I was 9 years old, and but then my grandma took us in, and she became our guardian. So I spent the next 7 years with her, and then my last 2 years of foster care, I was with a friend and his family, and they took me in.
From what I can remember, when I was about 4 or 5, I was first placed in, and from then up until aging out of the system, I was in and out of foster care.
Both of my parents were drug addicts and alcohol addicts, and it was kind of like they had me for a while, and then I went into foster care for a couple of years, and I was with them again, and then, you know, everything just kind of started to fall apart.
These kids are forced to think about such necessities as feeding themselves, getting a roof over their head, that they don't have time to ever think about college or aspirations of moving on. I mean, basically it's keep your job, keep a roof over your head, clothes on your back, and you know, food in your stomach. That's it. I mean, that's all they're worrying about.
Well, from what you read in books and you see on TV and you hear people like your parents help you go to college, and you know, real quickly when you're in the foster care system and you realize you don't have any parents to help you do that, and maybe even your guardians didn't go to college, so they're not there to help you.
Fortunately, there are scholarships and everything out there for foster youth, but to have something that is this comprehensive, the scholarship includes everything that we would need to succeed.
Well, I'm actually attending graduate school in the fall for a master's program in marriage and family therapy. So I'm planning on becoming a marriage and family therapist.
I'm undeclared right now, but I already know that I'm geared towards psychology as well.
I'll be starting here at San Diego State, a master's in accounting, and so I'm going to be an accountant.
It's one of the most amazing things I've done in my life is to help these kids to do that, to accomplish that, to go on and even have a chance at accomplishing whatever dreams they might have.
So why did Alex Smith decide this was going to be his foundation, right? He's just come into the NFL, he's come into some money. And then what drew you to Alex to tell his story?
Alex's story is very interesting. A colleague of mine who teaches at the University of San Diego, her husband worked at the program, the Young Scholars Ambassadors program that Alex Foundation's funds. So that's how I got connected with him. And they connected with him, Alex's mom. So Alex's mom, who works for the city government of San Diego, vetted me to make sure that I was okay. And then she connected me directly with Alex, and we emailed and spoke on the phone. Alex's story is interesting because a lot of times we give because of what we've experienced. Alex's story is the opposite. When he came out of high school, he had both parents. He had a support network, upper middle class family. He said in the interview, if his car broke down, he'd just pick up his phone and someone would come help him. When he heard about the San Diego area high school grads who didn't have any of this, he thought, I can't imagine where I would be if I didn't have this support system, and I can't imagine what these kids are doing. So he researched the problem. And he found out 70% of them usually wind up on the street or in jail or in trouble. And it was the opposite of his condition that propelled him to create his foundation.
It's interesting how it's these moments where you see something and you act upon it. There's another gentleman here from an African country who realizes all this soap that is being wasted at hotels, and back home soap is so vastly needed among the population.
Right, right. Yeah, Derek Kayungo, a refugee from Uganda, comes to the United States, goes to some conference, and stays at a fancy hotel. He checks in his room, and there's not one, not two, but 3 bars of soap on the sink, each for some different purpose, you know. He uses the soap, leaves his room, comes back, the soap's replaced. He says, well, where did the used soap go? I wasn't done using the soap yet. Well, we threw it out and we replaced it. And he was thinking of all the people in Africa who are dying of diarrhea simply because they can't wash their hands because they don't have soap. And that propelled him to create the Global Soap Project, where he takes used soap from hotels, scrapes a layer off of them, grinds it up, melts it, and creates fresh new bars of soap and ships them to Africa so people can wash their hands.
But of course, he tells the story of how they make it look kind of used and not real pristine because they don't want it sold in the black market.
Right.
Because it'll get taken.
Right. If the bars look too good, the black market's going to get involved and they're going to want to sell those bars of soap.
It's amazing how you take it from just what we suspect as philanthropy through all of these stories and the social activism that we really, I don't know that we always pair with philanthropy, but truly it is. And we take a look at the civil rights movement and Dr. William Anderson. Let's take a look at the clip.
It was started by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. They came into Albany with the avowed purpose of starting a voter registration project, recognizing that blacks throughout the South, for the most part, could not vote. Those that attempted to vote were denied, so it's very difficult to get registered to vote. That was the impetus for the Albany movement. They are making this sacrifice for me so I can get the right to register and vote. And I could not be comfortable with myself, and that's why I got out there and joined them. Then they say, well, who will be the leader? And I often tell people that possibly I was selected because I was the least objectionable. I had not been there long enough to irritate enough people, so actually it was by default. And sooner or later, I do believe we will be heard and we will be given some just consideration. We will keep praying in. We will keep kneeling in. We will even march if necessary to see to it that our rights come where? Here. And when? Now. We have to recognize that going to jail in the rural South was no small thing. There were many blacks who had gone to jail in these small towns never to be heard of again. And we had every reason to believe that they had been taken out of jail and lynched. Martin Luther King was a magnet because his name was already recognized throughout the world because of the successful Montgomery bus boycott.
I'm sure Dr. Anderson could deal with this much more intelligently, but I am sure that the Negro community in Albany will not be intimidated into a position of inaction or into a position of saying we will retreat on our quest for constitutional rights.
It meant the world's attention was focused on Albany. And we felt as though if we got the world's attention on it, there would be some changes made. Every day my wife spent in jail, every day I spent in jail, every night that I had to sleep away from home because I never spent 2 nights in a row in my home. The Ku Klux Klan had its rallies 1/2 block from my home, and I could hear that rhetoric. I could see the flames from the crosses. I could see the hoods. Was I afraid? Yes, I was afraid. Afraid enough to stop? No. But if this is the way I die, so be it. This is the way I want to go. That was a commitment that we had to make. You had to be willing to not just go to jail, but you had to be willing to give up your life. Otherwise, I don't think it would have been successful.
It's amazing how, just making change, knowing that something is unjust, and coming together. It seems so American as well.
It is, and I think what you said earlier is true. Social activism gets short shrift when we think about philanthropy and giving. And I asked my students in class, was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. a philanthropist? And they'll noodle on that for a while, and then they'll come to the conclusion, yes, he was. Well, why? Well, he volunteered his time and devoted his life to a cause, and he paid the ultimate price for that. So I can think of no higher philanthropic act. And as a result of his efforts, our society has been changed. We have laws on the books now. So it is a form of giving, and it definitely deserved mention. And Dr. Anderson, who worked with Dr. King to start the Albany movement, you know, is a big part of that.
I know we mentioned it early on, religion, and you mentioned secular class of folks out there. I know you've been studying that as well,
yes.
That there is a lot of secular giving. We don't see it quite as often, but it's there.
Yeah, it's there. It doesn't come close to matching the faith-based giving. It's on the rise, and I think some of the secular groups are starting to recognize that and ask themselves reflectively, why, you know, we engage in giving, but why don't we even come close to the levels of giving of the folks that give out of faith? And I think they're starting to examine that, and they're realizing that the faith-based organizations have that common sense of community. They have the physical structure, whether it be the mosque or the temple or the church, where people can come to and feel like they're part of a universal community-based cause. So I think the secular folks are trying to actually, ironically, learn from the faith-based folks and how they can bring up their level of giving.
Is it a case of coming together and being organized?
I believe it is.
To lever the power behind giving?
I think that's number one. I think number two, right after that, is understanding that we can't, as secular people, you know, we can't just get together as a bunch of thinkers and continue to think and talk about it. It requires action. And I think that's where some of the faith-based folks have it over the secular folks too. They turn their faith into action. And again, I think these are some of the things the secular folks are starting to reflect upon and think about.
And then, of course, there's always that private-public partnership that we see, that nonprofit public partnership. You explore this as well.
Yeah, you know, quite frankly, you know, we call them three sectors: the business sector, the public sector, meaning government, nonprofit sector. But we're seeing that the lines between the three are becoming more and more blurred through social enterprise, social entrepreneurship, governments contracting out to nonprofits to provide services, and I think, you know, we should have looked back to Ben Franklin when we were supposed to, but I think we're, you know, 300 years later, we're finally realizing, wait a minute, we've got these complex social problems. They've been around for centuries. They're so complex, we shouldn't rely on any one of those three sectors. We should really start looking at how the three can work together to solve those problems.
Because you have to be careful, right? You don't want the pendulum to swing too far one way or the other. I mean, government still plays a role in social programs as well, and not everything can be shifted over to the nonprofit sector. No,
and the nonprofit sector, and it's mentioned in the film, is just not capitalized at the level that it can be a complete safety net for social problems. We need the government, through its coercive power of taxes and laws and regulations and protection of our rights as citizens, to help us with that. But clearly the two of them need to work together.
Where do you see that balance now?
Well, government, regardless of the political party in office, administration, continues to devolve itself of engaging in social services, even with the advent of the healthcare reform. So the nonprofit sector is growing. It's now 10% of our workforce in this country. And I think the nonprofit sector is strained at this point. And I think we still have politicians in office and running for office saying, well, that's better left to the nonprofit sector. Well, maybe not. If the sector doesn't have the capital and resources to perform those services, it might not be the most adequate safety net. So I think we need to start shifting in the other direction a little bit.
And you're seeing that entrepreneurship and that triple bottom line as well.
Yeah, the business sector is really coming forward in this regard. It's not just about making a profit. It's about being a good corporate citizen, engaging in corporate social responsibility, being kind to the environment. So you have businesses engaging more and more in philanthropic behavior.
The documentary is called What is Philanthropy? The producer, the director is Salvatore Alaimo. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Patrick.
And thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week.